So my name is Russ Coleman'sberger, and I'm a special agent for the CN Railroad Police. And a lot of people have no idea the railroad has its own police department, but we do exist. We're not unicorns. So there's only 5 of us actually in the state. Between the 5 of us, we cover Wisconsin, the UP, and Minnesota. So we all have pretty giant territories. That's where we're at. My territory basically runs me from Stevens Point up to Wausau, all the way over to the Twin Cities, down to La Crosse, and then kind of back to Point. So I've got about 11 counties that I cover all by myself. So it's a fairly unique position. I was originally a police chief in a community out west of here for a few years before joining the railroad. So we all come from prior law enforcement backgrounds, so it's not like we just come out of the academy and decide we're going to go to the railroad thing. It's something you want some kind of administrative background because you manage that whole territory by yourself and figure out what you're going to do for the day. So a little bit of railroad and railroad police history. Back in the 1830s, Maryland and South Carolina were the first states to build railroads. In 1835, there were 11 states that had approximately 200 railroads operating within about 1,000 miles of track in those states. We jump up to the 1850s, you get about 9,000 miles of mainline track, but it was pretty much isolated to the eastern side of the country. So there had not been development west of the Mississippi by that point. But they did begin by about 1851 to expand westward across the Mississippi River. And so you had all of your criminals that were trying to hop the trains and steal stuff and rob the passengers and all that kind of fun stuff. So in 1865, Pennsylvania actually was the first state to enact a railroad police statute that gave authority to people to provide law enforcement services to the railroads. Abraham Lincoln was actually an Illinois Central lawyer back in the day. And when he determined all of this theft and robbery was going on, he's the one who urged Allan Pinkerton to start railroad policing. And he created the Northwestern Police Detective Agency back in 1865 to provide those services for the railroad. So the Wild Bunch was 1890s. They are credited with robbing a lot of trains. They had the Great Train Robbery, and Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp, names you've probably heard of before, were railroad police back in the day. And there's their pictures, Bat and Wyatt. Pictures of just some old railroad police officers back in the day. Abraham Lincoln, and I believe Allen is this gentleman here, if I'm not mistaken, and then our picture of Wanted Dead or Alive for the Wild Bunch there. So, in the 1940s through World War II, there approximately 9,000 railroad police existed between the U.S. and Canada. So the numbers have really grown, obviously, throughout that. About 400 railroads between the two countries there, with about 225,000 miles of track, mainline track, for each of those railroads. And passenger rail was pretty big. That's how you got across the country at that time, which obviously was how we had a lot of robberies and burglaries off of trains. So the railroad police, again, as the Western territories became states, the railroads used their influence with the state legislatures to enact railroad police authority statutes. To this day, the only state in the United States that does not recognize railroad police is Wyoming. Minnesota was recently, for many, many years, they did not recognize railroad police. However, about back in March, I think it was, we have successfully gotten railroad police authority back in Minnesota. So a lot of people think that we're federal officers, but we're actually started in the state. We're commissioned in the state where we reside or work. And then there is a federal statute that allows us to go to other states where we have property as well. So, but the railroad police in the early days, they had to overcome lots of obstacles, little or no training, right? It was just people that they're like, you look like somebody who should probably be helping trains, and so they had to figure out what it is that they were doing. They had no authority off of railroad property, so as they're trying to get to and from, or there's an incident that occurred on the railroad property that led off the railroad property, they had to turn it over to the local jurisdiction. But once you get west of the Mississippi, there were no states, there were no counties, there were no law enforcement officers. And so that's really why the railroad police were created, to be able to bridge that gap of lack of authority. They had very low salaries, no backup, which just talked about a few minutes ago. I'm one guy for 11 counties, so that still exists today. But we integrate very closely with our local law enforcement partners too. So it's changed quite a bit over the years as well. But, the railroad police actually had a pretty big influence on railroad policing back in the day through investigative techniques, the use of undercover operatives. All of that came through the railroad police back in the day. In fact, the very first president of the International Association of the Chiefs of Police was the chief of police for the Katy Railroad back in the day. And the term special agent is not that we associate with the FBI or any other federal agency. That term actually came from the railroad police back in the day. Railroad police in the western side of the country were known as special agents, and railroad police on the eastern side were detectives, railroad detectives. So it's there's quite a storied history back in the day when we start talking about railroad police. So talk about railroad police today. We now go through the same training, and probably even more than most of the local law enforcement. It's a pretty unique position. You have to learn how the railroad operates, all the unique aspects of all of that. So there's a little bit more that goes into it as well. We are paid by the railroad. We're paid by a private entity. However, we're granted public authority to investigate crimes, make arrests, stop cars, give tickets, all the same things that other law enforcement officers do. We're privileged to do as well under our state's authority. Typically, the railroad police are hired from other law enforcement agencies. So again, I came out of an agency out of the western side of the state. I was a police chief, and I'm starting my 20th year in law enforcement next year, I guess. So I've been in it for a little while. Surprisingly, as everybody always says, it goes like that. They weren't kidding. We go through field training just like any other officer, but we also have additional, as I talked about a minute ago, additional training to learn about railroad and railroad specific aspects as well. So what the industry needs are from the railroad, what they need us to be focusing on to help them achieve their business. We're often, as you see, in uniform I've got a fully marked police car. We'll patrol the rail yards, the depots, the railroad property. I do a lot of chasing of trains up and down the stretch here just to see what kind of violations are going on to try to make sure that the trains don't have to stop and block communities for longer than they normally would when an incident occurs. Just keep them going as much as we can. We do conduct our complex investigations when you think about the railroads going across multiple jurisdictions, multiple cities, counties, and states. That involves lots of external partners and lots of unique investigative aspects as well. Ranging from the cargo theft, vandalism, theft of equipment. We've had locomotives get torched, lit on fire, train vehicle collisions we'll talk about here in just a few minutes, but assaults and murders that occur on or near railroad property, we get involved in all of it. We are, again, fully commissioned officers just like any other officer. One of our main focus efforts is to provide local law enforcement training, right? When there's train incidents, we want to be there and have those communications with them, so we want to start doing some training ahead of time. I do a lot of driver's ed classes. In fact, a lot of what you see today is what I present to the driver's ed classes to try and prevent those incidents from occurring in the future. And I do school presentations as well as things like this, truck drivers, firefighters, really anybody that'll listen to me talk for an hour, I'll come and have a conversation. So. And we do participate in community events. I was just at National Night Out down in Wisconsin Rapids this last week as well. So we do all the same things that that you see other law enforcement officers do. So here's some pictures of us on the work. That's the 5 crew right there from Wisconsin, UP, and Minnesota. That's us. Sometimes our trains derail. It doesn't happen terribly often, but we'll work with local law enforcement to keep the scene clean, keep it safe for everybody, and make sure people aren't where they're supposed to be. It's pretty rare, but sometimes we'll hop on a train and go for a ride just to see what the engineers and conductors are seeing out there, problem areas that we should be focusing on a little bit for them. We do traffic stops, we do trespass stops all over the place. We don't have the funny little wheels on our cars anymore because we get in the way of trains and they like to make money, and so if we're in their way, they can't move the trains as fast. So They don't let us out there, but some railroads do have specialized canine units, just like any other law enforcement agency that's out there as well. But for us, about every 3 hours, somebody gets hit by a train in the United States. So that's either a person or a vehicle. So about 8 times a day that happens. It's pretty frequent when you really think about how many trains are out there versus how many other cars are out there as well. We're not immune to it here in Marshfield. I mean, we've seen it over the years. Knock on wood, it's been greatly reduced over the years, and that's obviously credited to a lot of engineering improvements with the roadways and the traffic signals being integrated with the railroad warning devices. Obviously, local law enforcement providing some enforcement efforts as well as education that we do across the system to try and raise that awareness as well. So, more than half of all collisions actually occur where there's gates that are blocking the roadway. It's pretty impressive to see, and I'm not exactly sure what contributes to that. But when you put a gate in front of somebody, whether they decide they've got plenty of time to go or whatever the case may be, again, about 53% of the time, I think, is the stat that you can see there's a gate and they still get hit by a train. Approximately half of all collisions occur when the train is going 30 miles an hour or less at the time of impact. So as fast as most people drive through downtown Marshfield, the train is not going really, really fast when these incidents occur. It's about 30 miles an hour or less. And about 70% of those collisions occur during clear weather. It's not like today, rain, it's not sleet, fog, freezing rain, or snow. It's clear weather. The vast majority of those collisions happen when vehicles don't stop, or they stop too closely to the railroad tracks and get tagged, and I've got a video on that later on, and that's a big issue that we have here in Marshfield with Veterans Parkway running right next to the tracks. I get a lot of cars that park between the tracks and Veterans Parkway, and there's really not a lot of room there for cars, and so they end up sometimes getting hit in the rear. The nice thing here is the traffic lights are integrated with the warning devices, so that shouldn't happen, but those are some issues that we see across our network all over the place. Incidents don't happen in a big city, and they don't happen out in the middle of nowhere. They really happen all over the place. There's no pattern that shows us that if you're in a big city, you're going to have a bigger problem with it. Other than obviously there's more population density, but generally speaking, they happen all over the place. So anytime is train time. We always say that you should expect a train on any track from any direction at any time, even if you've never seen a train on there before. I can't tell you how many times this line that runs along Veterans Parkway out to 29th Street out there, people tell me there's never a train out there, and we run one train every single day out there to service the local industries. Okay. In fact, they built new track out there to PCA, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago. So we are actively running up and down that line. And so always expect a train. Whenever you see those railroad tracks, make sure the head is on the swivel looking around. I've actually been at crashes before where people have asked why the train did not swerve. The train goes forward and backward on the rails, and that's it. There's no steering wheel, so that's a little tough. And then for trains, coming to a stop is a little difficult. So your 3,000-pound hunk of metal going up and down the highway every day at 55 miles an hour, it takes you about 200 feet to come to a stop. A school bus takes about 230 feet. And when we think about all of our kids and grandkids out on those school buses up and down the highways every day, 230 feet to come to a stop. Semi-truck about 300 feet. A passenger train, which we don't have any really around here. Probably the closest is going to be Chicago area. Takes about 600 feet, double that of the semi, right? And again, it's pretty light when you think about a train. It's the weight of the train and the people inside of it. They're not pushing a lot of weight or freight, so it really can stop fairly quickly. When you consider our trains, which we run about 30 to 40 trains a day through the city of Marshfield, it takes us about 5,280 feet, or a mile or more, to bring the train to a stop. Again, we're talking about 55 miles an hour. Again, you got steel wheels running on steel rail. There's not a lot of friction there. They're a lot heavier than most other vehicles, and so that increases the stopping distance as well. So it's the best of both worlds for the railroad, because at the end of the day, with limited friction, we're able to push a lot of freight without a lot of effort, right? Our locomotives can haul 12 million pounds plus of freight with just a couple locomotives without much issue because there's not a lot of friction. So trains have a tough time stopping and they cannot swerve as well. So that mile is about 18 football fields end to end as well. So again, trains are pretty heavy. Your 3,000 pound car running over a 12-ounce can of soda is fairly equivalent to our 12 million pound freight train running over a car. It's about a 4,000 to 1 weight ratio, and that's kind of what it looks like in the end. So trains obviously have crushing power as they're moving up and down the railroad tracks, and so it's one of those things you don't want to be in front of when they're coming down the tracks. And that's why it's really crucial to be paying attention as you're on railroad crossings. Sometimes cars get stuck on the tracks. This doesn't happen too terribly often, but from time to time, especially in winter, we see the snow built up, people stop where they shouldn't, and then maybe they can't get traction to go. So if this happens to you, the first thing we want you to do is get out of the car. And then we want you to get away from the car, even if you don't see or hear a train, because once you're outside of that danger zone, you can start making more important decisions, like what's my next move? But at least get yourself out of the way of being in that danger zone of getting hit by a train. So get out, get away, and then locate the emergency notification system sign, which is a blue sign. A lot of people don't know these things are there, but these are found at every public crossing across the United States. It has an 800 number for the railroad, so you don't even have to look it up. We give you the number right on the sign for the railroad that controls that particular set of tracks. And then this unique identifier here, which is 6 digits plus a letter, that uniquely identifies that particular railroad crossing. So you can call the 800 number, and you can give them that number and say, I'm at 836-597H, my car is stuck on the tracks, can you please stop your trains? Or maybe there's another problem, right? Maybe the gates are down and there's no train anywhere in sight. You can use this sign to contact the railroad to let them know, because again, if we don't know there's a problem, we can't really fix it either. But that's the best way to contact the railroad. If you can't find that sign, perhaps you ran it over, call 911 and they'll be able to reach out to the railroad as well. So, but again, a lot of people don't know that's there. A couple years ago, we had 4 cars in one night in a snowstorm over in the Appleton area get hit by a train. One train took up 2 cars. Because nobody called, nobody let us know that this was a problem. And so again, if you can make those calls early on, that helps out. But recognize, when you call that number, you're probably talking to my dispatcher who's up in Montreal, Canada. And then they're going to call the rail traffic controller in Homewood, Illinois, who's going to pick up the radio and tell the train that's in the area to stop, which then starts the magic mile or more for the train to come to a stop. So there's still a lot that has to go right to make sure that those trains stop in time, but this is the best way to be able to make that happen if it's necessary.
So it won't pay to make the phone call when you hear the whistle?
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah. Yeah. So if you find yourself in this position and there is a train coming, we want you to run about a 45-degree angle towards the train, right? And I know it's up here already, but we don't want you to get hit by the debris field that's going to be happening, right? The train hits this car, it's going that way. I've seen tires fly off, windshields pop out, everything inside is usually outside by the time it comes to final rest. So we don't want you to be anywhere over here. Kind of run about a 45-degree angle towards the train. Hopefully, I don't have to actually say this, but I will just to protect myself. Don't run down the tracks towards the train. Do about a 45-degree angle towards the train, right? All right, so again, here's the emergency notification system sign. We've talked about it, and if I didn't do a good enough job of explaining it, here's a video.
Stuck on the railroad crossing? Get out of your vehicle. For help, call the number on the blue and white emergency notification system sign at the crossing. Give them the crossing number to alert train traffic. Remember, find the blue and white to save your life.
All right, right, so as we approach railroad crossing, I know you guys have been driving for a few years, so this is probably nothing new, but sometimes it's good to have that quick reminder as well. This is an advanced warning sign. It tells us there's something in the roadway up ahead that we need to start preparing for. For us as drivers, we need to start looking for a train, start listening for a train, and the one thing that I never see anybody do is slow down, right? And again, what we're trying to get people to do is to give themselves more time to react in case a train pops around this tree line at the very last second. If you give yourself more time to react to that train by slowing down, then maybe you can prevent getting hit by a train as well. So we want people to slow down. There's lots of conditions that we're required to reduce our speed, the hours of darkness, intersections, curves, all of these things require us to slow down a little bit. And the railroad crossing is no different as well. There are also pavement markings sometimes in the roadway that tell us the exact same thing, because believe it or not, there might be people that are just looking at the hood of their car instead of what they're going to hit in 3 seconds. So then there's pavement markings in the roadway that give us that same notification as well. And you can't pass when you're within 100 feet of the railroad crossing. I usually see this with school buses and hazmat vehicles have to stop at this crossing all the time, regardless of whether there's a train there or they're signaled to stop or not. They have to stop. And people will get impatient and want to pass, and they can't see anything, right? Because there's this giant behemoth now in their way. So you can't pass when you're within 100 feet of that railroad crossing. So passive railroad crossings, nothing changes at this location when a train approaches. It stays static. There's no lights, there's no gates, in other words. This sign right here is what we call a crossbuck sign, and a lot of people think the gates are called crossbucks, but this is actually what the crossbuck is. That sign right there says in all 50 states that you and I need to yield to the train. Because again, trains can't stop quickly, and they can't swerve, but we can. So we always have to yield to a train, or whatever's on the railroad tracks. And that sign right there says that, and there is statutory, there's a state statute that says that in all 50 states that is a yield sign. If there is not a bar that's painted on the roadway that tells you where to stop, then don't stop any closer than 15 feet from the nearest rail. We'll talk about that here in a minute as well. A number of years ago, the DOT decided they needed to put a yield sign underneath the crossbuck sign, so I guess it's a double yield. But nobody knew what that sign is. Surprisingly, nobody knows what that sign is either. But it's there at least, so hopefully people get the hint that you should yield to a train. But you can see right here where the emergency notification system sign is as well in those particular cases. Some of our crossings have stop signs, and that means that you have to stop all of the time. I will stop cars that blow through this, and they'll go, well, I thought I only had to stop when there was a train there. That's what this is. This means to stop all of the time, right? So, pretty straightforward. It's got the 8 sides, the white border, right? All those things that you heard growing up, like you don't have to stop unless it's got those things. It's got those things. Some railroad crossings will have red flashing lights, like you see here. And so that always means stop, the red flashing light. They have them on school buses. If you drive through a community in the middle of the night where they change the traffic lights to a flashing red, it always means stop. And it's no different at the railroad crossing. So always stop and yield to the train. Some railroad crossings just have lights and they may not have gates. And I've stopped cars before where they go, well, I was waiting for the gate to come down. I'm going to be waiting a while. Because there's no gate. So, again, trains always have that right of way, and that's gone to the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of times over the years, that it's always incumbent on us to yield to trains. So, sometimes there will be a gate, like you see here in Marshfield. All these crossings pretty much have gates on them. And when that is lowered or in the process of coming down or in the process of going up, the road is temporarily closed. Where we see a lot of issues, I don't think we've got any of the crossings here that have double track. But like you see here, there's 2 sets of track, and when the gate starts to go up and we get a train that comes from the opposite direction, the gate starts to come back down. And if traffic goes before the gate is fully lowered, the gate might land on their car. To which, of course, they call us and say, you owe me a windshield. And we say, no, you're not supposed to go, so fix your own windshield. By the way, we've got a bill for the gate too. So you can't go through, and again, that's just to make sure that you don't have any damage in your car. You need to wait for those gates to go up and be fully raised. Nobody ever does that, but again, it is state law that that is the case as well. In Wisconsin, many other states, I'm sure, there's actually an owner liability law that says if a railroad employee watches you go around those gates, they can just capture your license plate, the date and the time and location, and give it to local law enforcement or give it to me, and then we just write a ticket to the registered owner of the car. Without stopping the car, we don't have to prove who was driving it or anything like that. So again, it's just one of those things to avoid. The only reason you can go around those gates is if there's a railroad employee waving you through. Other than that, if there's no train anywhere in sight, you can't go through. There's no other exception in the state law other than a railroad employee waving you through. So again, going around the gates is obviously dangerous. It is illegal, and we've got a nice cool sports car going through right now. And again, railroad employee standing there watching that could just turn that information over to local law enforcement. So obviously make sure that we don't go until the gates are fully raised. So those red flashing lights will actually flash for about 3 to 5 seconds before the gates even start to come down. It's the same time as a yellow traffic light. So if you're safely able to stop in time for that yellow traffic light to change to red, you should be able to do that here as well. Come on. There we go. So here's a video that just shows that for us. So 25 miles an hour, you've got 3 seconds before the gates start to come down, which is the same amount of time as that yellow traffic light, right? So, multiple tracks means multiple trains. So here's this inverted T that tells us, hey, there's 2 tracks at this particular location. So again, make sure that before you go across those tracks, you look both directions down both sets of tracks for as far as you can. So make sure when that train gets through that intersection that you can actually see on the other side of that rail car for quite a distance before you commit to going across, because of course you might have a train coming from the other direction on the other track. If they're going the opposite direction on the same track, it's a bad day, right? But if there's multiple tracks, that can be a problem for us. So again, also make sure that you've got enough room on the other side of those tracks to commit to going across before you actually go across it, so that you've got enough room and you don't get tagged on the rear end. Here's a video, you may have seen this in the news a number of years ago. There's an infant on the other side of these railroad tracks that's not breathing, and so these officers are here going to go and respond and provide that emergency assistance to this non-breathing infant. And unfortunately, as trains do sometimes, they block us in, and the officer's just simply sitting here waiting for this last car to get across. And off in the distance, you can hear a train horn. And you hear the train horn get closer, which is a clue. It's probably not this train.
Oh my God!
So it's one of those things, right? We, as officers, but as human beings, we get so focused in on what we're trying to do that we forget to pay attention to all those extra clues that are going on around us all the time. Railroad crossings are especially dangerous just simply because of the size and mass of that train and the fact that it can't swerve and it can't stop quickly. All of those things are a very dangerous recipe, which really means that we got to pay more attention when we're going across railroad crossings for sure. Some communities, like Marshfield, don't have train horns, so you might see signs like this that say no train horn, or signs like this that say no train horn, and just in case you didn't have enough examples of what that looks like, here's another picture of a sign that says no train horn. So. Again, you can't look or listen for a train at that point. We have to be looking for that as well. If you've ever spent time in an airport watching airplanes come in for a landing, they look like they're just hanging up in the air. And in reality, they're going 150 to 200 miles an hour as they come in for that landing. But because there's nothing up here in the sky for your brain to gauge the speed of that airplane against, when you're sitting in traffic waiting for cars to go through, there's buildings, there's poles, there's stop signs. Your brain can kind of figure out kind of how fast that car is going and whether you've got an ability to pull up in front of another car or you have time to make it across. But you can't do that with a plane because there's nothing up there that helps you gauge the speed of that. Well, the same thing happens with trains because of the big, long, snaking body, right? It's a mile. We run a lot of 2-mile long trains. Union Pacific is running 3-mile long trains these days. There's really no definitive start and finish to that train. The angle of approach of where you're sitting, it looks like trains are going a lot slower than what they really truly are. So people will figure out, hey, I've got time, and they'll decide that they're going to go and unfortunately get hit by a train. So again, if you see that train coming, you want to make sure that you stay put and wait for that train to clear the crossing before you commit to going across. Talked about it, don't pass on the tracks, don't shift your gears. Again, manual transmissions or stick shifts. It's actually illegal to shift your gears as you're going across. You need to be in a gear high enough to make it across safely. We don't want you to stall the car and then start the whole, well, do I call the person on the blue sign or do I try to get this thing started? It starts a dilemma right there, and now you're stuck in a car and here comes a train. So you can't shift your gears while you're going across those tracks. Obviously automatics, they just do what they're going to do, and that's totally fine as well. And hopefully it's pretty obvious that don't stop on the tracks. And again, give yourself that 15 feet in front of and behind your car from the nearest rail. And one of the reasons, trains overhang the rails by about 3 to 4 feet on each side as well. I get people all the time walking on the outside of the rail, and well, I'm not going to get hit by a train. Yeah, you will, right? It's not going to be a fun day. So make sure you give yourself that extra distance. Sometimes our load shift, and you might have a log that's kind of sticking out. Maybe we've got a strap on the load that's broken and it's flapping in the wind. So again, just make sure to give yourself that extra distance to prepare for something that you don't expect as you're at that railroad crossing. So this looks fairly reminiscent. This is not Marshfield, but it looks fairly reminiscent to what you see. If you can imagine, this is Veterans Parkway. Here's the railroad tracks. There's an intersection that crosses right up here, and there's an ambulance right there, and he says, I'm not waiting for this train. I'm going to sit myself right in between the tracks and the roadway because I don't want to wait for this train, which I see all the time. And this is what unfortunately can happen is, well, here comes a train, right? Again, we always forget about behind our car, right? Because we just don't see it every day. And then watch how long it takes the train to come to a stop. And the engineer can't give up. He's still got to keep blowing the horn for the next crossing, right? Even though he just hit someone or something. And please don't be this guy. Got to get in there and take our picture. And then just turn around and walk away. So 17 rail cars went through that intersection after that initial collision, and that's pretty quick by train standards, but any way you look at it, that's still 17 rail cars that went through there, plus the 2 locomotives. It took a while. Right? Not something you want to be in front of. And again, we're supposed to reduce our speed during the hours of darkness, but we do have reflective materials on the side of the railroad cars and the locomotives as well, and that's a good reason. Those advanced warning signs are key as you're driving up and down the roads. I catch myself all the time ignoring those signs. I know everybody does, but again, they're there for a reason to tell us there's something up ahead. So pay attention to those things as we're going up and down the roadways as well. Make sure that you keep yourself safe, and always expect a train. You are actually 20 times more likely to die in a crash with a train than you are with another motor vehicle. And that's pretty simple physics, right? 3,000 pounds hitting my car or 12 million pounds hitting my car. Unfortunately, we're probably not always going to limp away from the one with a train, right? Multitasking can be dangerous. I think we've all got way too much going on in our lives as it is. I think we're just naturally distracted these days. Whether you've got a burger in your hand or you've got a phone in your hand, I think we're just distracted. We got to get to Little Johnny's practice this weekend. We got the birthday party going on. We got to go get the cake. Tonight, I've got to go do this meeting. The kids need to get their homework. There's just all of these things that are keeping us distracted today. But then when you throw these extra things in there, that only enhances that distraction as well. So really put those distractions away, especially as you are, driving on the railroad tracks. So this is one thing that I like to do for driver's ed classes. You guys can play along as well. You can see the instructions there. Count how many times the player's wearing white pass the basketball.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Anybody got a count?
Count.
I got 9.
Yes. It's 15 passes.
I was just worried the white guys.
I was good.
Did you see the gorilla?
Yeah. But you said the white guys, you just.
Correct.
Was something that went through.
Correct, and that's the idea, right? So driving is a divided attention task, and that's what we're asking you to do, is to divide your attention by looking at white, and here comes a black gorilla walking through the middle. The study shows about 50% of us see the gorilla and 50% of us don't see the gorilla, because again, you're so focused in, like that officer was at that intersection, on this particular task, that you don't necessarily see that. So it's just, for me anyway, a good reminder when I do driver's ed classes to show the kids, like, hey, here's something that you're probably not thinking about, and when you see that kind of stuff, kind of as a good reminder, I think anyway. So we were talking about it earlier on. Railroad property is actually private property. It's owned by the railroads. And we don't want people walking up and down our tracks. Again, about every 3 hours somebody gets hit by a train, and we talked about how trains can't swerve. So it's not like they're driving through downtown Marshfield, knocking people off the sidewalks with the trains. They go forward and backward on the train tracks. And if you're not on the train tracks, you're not going to get hit by a train. So we don't want people walking up and down the tracks or using them as shortcuts, crossing them where they're not supposed to. All of that's dangerous, and it's actually illegal. It's trespassing in the state of Wisconsin and every other state as well. So we get ATVs, UTVs. I'm not sure if this is helpful for the back, riding a bike down the tracks, but I would tend to believe it wouldn't feel so great. Earbuds and headphones are a big thing these days that we see a lot of. People out for a stroll, listening to music. You'll never hear that train coming up from behind you, which I know everybody goes, there's no way you could miss that. But there certainly is a way you can miss that. People taking their pictures. She's not focused in on whether there's a train coming. She's focused in on getting that perfect shot. We see a lot of wedding pictures, prom pictures, graduation pictures out on the railroad tracks. And again, that photographer is not looking for a train. And nobody else is out there for a train either. They're out there to get the perfect shot. So those are all dangerous situations. We see, unfortunately, people get hit by trains in these instances. I won't say on a regular basis, but we do see it from time to time, including people going out hunting or fishing, using the railroad tracks as access points. Again, a couple of years ago down by La Crosse, I think we had a pretty young girl that was just going out to go fishing, walking down the tracks. So, again, always expect a train. You got a berm on one side, a train on the other side. This guy's riding a dirt bike down the middle of the track. Where do you go, right, when there's a train that comes around the curve? That's kind of that speed misperception. While the train was off in the distance, it looked like it was crawling. Right in front of you there, boy, it looked like it was going a lot faster than what you probably thought it was initially. So where do you cross? Well, even Marshfield here has a is it an overpass or is it an underpass right over here? I think yeah.
It's over.
So they might put overpasses in, they might put underpasses in so that you can go under the railroad tracks. Otherwise, where the crosswalk or the sidewalk crosses or where the roadway crosses, those are the only legal locations that you can go. Anywhere else is technically trespassing. Wisconsin is $263.50 for that. And then I think in Canada it's $1,000 plus court costs. So it's a serious issue, right? When you have every 3 hours somebody getting hit by a train in the United States. Placing objects on the rail, and yes, even if it's just a penny, is illegal. Not only are you trespassing, but just placing anything on the rail itself is illegal. It's a crime. You go to jail in Wisconsin, I'm sure other states as well. This is a little bit older group, so do you guys ever remember the game Tiddlywinks? See, and I do the driver's ed classes, nobody knows what Tiddlywinks are. So it's really tough. But it's the same concept, right? When you take something with that much pressure and you push it down, and it shoots out at a really fast clip. Same thing's going to happen with anything you put on the rails as well, right? 12 million pounds pressing down on whatever it is, you might get hurt, right? So this is the very first presentation I think I've ever given where they knew what Tiddlywinks was. So tunnels and bridges. I have a bridge that's 184 feet up in the air, and it's a half-mile long, and it's beautiful. It overlooks the St. Croix River over by Minnesota. And I will have trespassers out on that bridge every day that it's really nice weather. They're out there to take their selfies and their pictures. And we run trains across that at 40 miles an hour every single day. So it's a really tough spot, but again, where do you go when that train comes around the curve at 40 miles an hour? So it's trespassing. Again, recognize trains probably occupy the entire width of that railroad bridge that's there. And over here with the tunnels, most of our tunnels have rats running through them, so that's not a place I want to be either. So, so again, it's just not good places to be. Trains can move without warning. So this kid hanging onto these two rail cars, the engineer's a mile away, has no idea that he's hanging onto those two rail cars. Trains will actually, and let me show you this video quick. Trains will actually separate about 8 to 10 feet as they pull the train, and then they'll accordion compress down to about this distance here as they apply the brakes. This video isn't great, but it kind of shows that what we call slack action that occurs. You can kind of see that compression that occurs between the rail cars. So, again, this is compressed, and obviously, so is this picture. I don't stretch 8 to 10 feet, and I'm sure he doesn't either, right? And again, nothing on the railroad is made of marshmallow fluff, so it's unfortunately could be dangerous and get you hurt in a hurry. Being too close, we talked about that. This kid's got a backpack on. There's lots of fun things underneath rail cars to get hung up on. So again, we don't want people crawling underneath the trains. It's illegal to do that as well. And I get it, trains block the crossings and I just need to get to the other side. But when you think of all of the things that can go wrong, it's an unfortunate day at that point. So. All right, so again, don't walk on the tracks. All that fun stuff, talking on the phone is going to be distracting. Laying on the tracks, that always seems like a really intelligent thing to do as well. So again, everybody always thinks they're going to hear that train coming. Then how do we hit people every 3 hours or cars? So again, tracks for trains are not for people. Exempt signs. So all of these crossings right through here are all exempt. Do the trains stop for us? Nope. Are there only 3 trains a day that go through? Nope. Do trains go really, really slow? They're not like going 90, but they go track speed. So I've heard all of those excuses that this sign means trains don't go through there, they go slow, only 3 a day, they have to stop for me, all of those things. And none of that applies. It really has to do with, well, like that ambulance video. We don't want a school bus to turn onto that side street, if you think of off of Veterans Parkway, turning onto Maple. We don't want a school bus to do that and have to stop the railroad tracks with their rear end hanging out into the middle of Veterans Parkway. So the exempt sign is there to provide them the opportunity to just continue and not make that dangerous decision to have to stop for that railroad crossing. So that's really what the exempt sign is all about. Buses and hazmat vehicles don't have to stop in those instances. That's all that means. So the same number of trains run through here, whether that sign is there or not. You get down into the Chicagoland area, you'll see maybe some passenger trains that get their power from wires up above. Also, there's a third rail down in Chicago as well that has electricity in it that runs the train. So again, good reason not to trespass because there's high voltage electricity running through the ground in that particular instance. We'll skip through this one here really quick. And this one. Another advanced warning sign that tells us that we've got railroad tracks off to the side. So if you're going to make this turn, make sure you look over your shoulder before you commit to making that turn. Or the other way, right? If you're going to make this left turn here, make sure you look over your shoulder. I see this one from time to time. People will just pull right in front of the train and never even looked back behind them to see whether that train was coming. So again, just a good reminder to be paying attention. We are in farm country as well. Obviously, all the same rules apply. I like to point this one out. Combines, sprayers, and tractors, they're big, but trains are bigger, right? So obviously the train, unfortunately, is going to win that battle, and so we need to make sure that we're stopping and staying stopped so we're not getting hit by trains. But all the same things apply to farm equipment as well. So here's a news story from a number of years ago. They talk about, well, you see the locomotive engineer's perspective from the train. You will hear the common outcry from the community to put lights and gates at a particular crossing to prevent incidents from occurring. They'll talk about the speed misperception. And then here's a little stat over here in the corner, and I'm going to turn up the volume on the TV so that you can hear this. But that stat right there tells us all of the instances where trains hit cars where there are gates. Oh, this could be fun. Oh, I want volume. Maybe. Well, this may not work. Make sure the line's up as loud as it can go. It is. Well, we'll see how this works. But at any rate, there's the stats right there. 53% of all crossing accidents happened between 2012 and 2017. That shows us where the gates were, and then 13% where they were just flashing lights. So most of the time the railroad is telling the motoring public there's a train coming, and unfortunately they still get hit.
Thousands of trains crisscross rural roads and city streets each year. When people on foot or in vehicles try to beat trains across those intersections, the results can be deadly. The Tunis investigators took our cameras into the cab of a Burlington Northern Santa Fe locomotive. Look at what we saw. In less than half an hour on the rail, the man with the guitar was not only risking his life, but potentially a derailment. The engineer had to pull the emergency brake. Moments later, a bicyclist scoots around the crossing gate to beat the train. The Federal Railroad Administration says 87% of fatalities involving trains are the direct result of poor judgment or risky behavior. Our own Facebook survey found about 1 in 10 respondents saying a friend or relative was killed trying to beat a train. Shannon Williams writes, my uncle and my other uncle's wife were driving and they tried to beat a train. She was killed instantly. Every time I see people racing to beat a train, I think of that. Lots of respondents also admitted going around railroad crossing gates to avoid having to wait. This viral YouTube video is from a police dashboard cam. It shows a car getting hit twice as its driver tries to beat a pair of trains across the tracks. The driver survived, but not all crossings have lights or crossing gates, particularly in more rural areas. In Owata County, September 30th, sisters 9-year-old Haley and 6-year-old Hannah Benham died after a train hit an SUV driven by their mother. The cause of the incident is still under investigation. Without exception, trains always have the right-of-way as they cross a road. The intersection where the little girls died has a sign showing tracks are present. John Knight lives nearby. He wants more.
We just lost 2 precious children here at this crossing. How many more do we have to lose? How many more accidents do we have to have before we can have lights and gates at our crossing?
Look Looking down the tracks, oncoming trains appear slow-moving, but freight trains a mile or more long race down the tracks at speeds up to 55 miles per hour. Whether a railroad crossing has only a sign or lights and gates, trains are supposed to blow their whistle while approaching and crossing roads. And from when the whistle begins to blow or crossing arms come down, there's only about 15 to 20 seconds before the train zooms through the intersection. If someone or something is on the tracks, there's no way to avoid a potentially deadly collision. Just to put it in perspective, stopping distance of an engine pulling a mile or more of cars is 18 football fields placed end to end. Ultimately, the railroads and law enforcement say safety on the tracks is your responsibility. When you come to tracks, crossing the road, stop and look both ways. And whatever you do, don't try to beat a train. Cross the tracks. Marla Carter, 2 News Books for you.
So I don't know if you could hear that terribly well, but it was really a summary of everything that we've talked about so far today. But probably on the camera you couldn't really hear that too terribly well, unless you've got a really good microphone on there. So we're pretty much at the end here. Just kind of a summary for you guys. About any time is train time. Again, always expect to train on any track from any direction at any time. Don't drive around those lowered gates. Make sure you give yourself 15 feet in front of and behind your car from the nearest rail. Don't pass within that 100 feet of the railroad crossing. Tracks, again, are for trains, are not for people, so we don't want people trespassing. Exempt signs, again, are for the hazmat vehicles, buses only. And complacency, and this is really a big one for me, complacency is what gets us as human beings killed. That moment that we just stop paying attention to all of the things that can hurt us, and we just go through the motions, like I said, you kind of forget seeing those yellow advanced warning signs all the time and not paying attention to those things. That's when we start running into problems, because we're not really preparing ourselves for those incidents to occur. So always make sure you're looking out for it. The example I like to use, when I was the chief of police in a community, people would come into my office all the time and complain about the school. They'd say, oh, those kids are gonna kill somebody, they're speeding, they're blowing through the stop sign, somebody's gonna get hurt, you need to get up there and make sure that doesn't happen. So of course you go sit there when school's in and school's letting out and all that fun stuff, and you watch the traffic, and it's, what I found anyway, generally it was not the kids, it was the parents. Because they've been driving for 10 to 15 years, they've been doing it for a long time. They're used to it, they know their car, they know the roads. They probably drove those same roads back when they were in high school going to and from the schools, right? So it's one of those things that we get complacent in our everyday lives and we run into those problems, and we just need to take a step back and really reevaluate where we're at. The stop sign is there for a reason. Let's stop. There's kids present. We should just instinctively slow down. But again, we get so caught in our everyday lives that we just kind of forget about those things. It's usually not intentional, right? It's usually just, we just do it every day. Remember, it takes a mile or more for that train to come to a stop, which is about 18 football fields, and look and listen at every railroad crossing. And this goes back to that whole complacency. When you see the gates, when you see the lights, they're not flashing, the gates aren't lowered, and you just go through that intersection without looking before going through it, I'm not going to place my life in some other human being's electronic device. I want to make sure that before I go across that crossing, there's no train coming from either direction. So I'm going to make sure that those lights and the gates are doing what they're supposed to. I will say that they work. They're designed to work on fail-safe principles. So even if the power is out or there's some other problem, all that equipment is designed to work. That's why sometimes when you see the gates are down and there's no train anywhere in sight, there's a problem with the system, and we're protecting that crossing because we can't reliably notify you if there's a train coming. So we're going to block that crossing and make sure that you don't get hit by a train. And again, that's why we need to be notified that there's an issue with that. So again, always look for trains, always expect a train, even if there are gates and lights and they're not active. Just check for your own safety to make sure that you don't end up being one of my statistics for this presentation. So that's really what I have for you guys. What questions can I answer, I guess, of the few of you that are here before I walk out of your lives forever? Good. Any other questions from the group here? I'm assuming they can ask questions on the feed. So, all right. Well, that's, again, what I've got for you guys, so I really appreciate the opportunity to come and have a conversation with you guys. Those of you that showed up here, you got some goodies, so those of you that are watching on TV in the future, you might want to show up. You might get some food, you might get a squishy train. So that's what I've got for you. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, Russ Coleman'sberger from the CN Railroad Police. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.